of Kilkenny was an important victory for Cromwell. The Irish were not yet conquered. A fierce pocket of resistance existed in the nearby town of Clonmel. For his final battle in Ireland, he would attack them. In late April 1650, Oliver Cromwell's rejuvenated army of 8,000 soldiers and 600 cavalry arrived at the walls of Clonmel on the banks of the River Suir. The name Clonmel, it seemed, would now be added to the bloody toll begun at Drogheda 7 months before.
Where they stand!
But the citizens of Clonmel had reason to take heart. In command of their garrison was Hugh Duff O'Neill, an experienced warrior and resistance leader. He had 2,000 men under his command, mostly Irish Catholic troops from Ulster.
The most disciplined, the most successful, the most experienced troops that the Irish had were these Ulster Irish forces. Hugh Duff was one of the few commanders that seems to be able to take on Cromwell and seems to be confident in taking him on.
Cromwell had little choice about where to place his heavy guns, the biggest of which weighed 8,000 pounds. With a river to the south and marshy terrain to the east and west, the only ground that could support these monsters was to the north. Because of this, Cromwell wouldn't be able to use his favorite tactic of creating two simultaneous breaches. This didn't worry Cromwell, although it should have, since it meant that O'Neill could focus his defense on one killing zone instead of two. It took nearly a day for Cromwell's guns to breach the walls. The plan was to send the infantry in first. Once they were in, they'd swing around and open one of the town's gates for the waiting cavalry. Cromwell ordered the charge and personally joined his cavalry at the gate.
Let's go to right!
He had no idea that O'Neill had prepared a nasty surprise. Now, here's Cromwell's tips for conquerors. Be brutal and violent in your opening attack to instill fear and demoralize your enemy. Outman and outgun your enemy. Use heavy artillery wherever possible. Secure unbreakable supply lines. They are your lifeline. In the spring of 1650, Oliver Cromwell's redcoats began their defiant charge into the town of Clonmel, the latest target on their campaign to conquer Ireland. Intoning hymns and psalms as they charged, they poured through the breach, God's army storming its way to yet another victory. But the Irish commander of the garrison, Hugh O'Neill, had other ideas. He had laid a trap. Behind the city walls, he'd constructed two walls perpendicular to the breach and one parallel to it, forming a pen. Atop the walls, O'Neill placed his artillery and men. Once Cromwell's men charged through the killing zone, the Irish were able to fire down on them like shooting fish in a barrel.
The guys following into the breach didn't know that their colleagues were trapped inside the wall, so they kept on pouring in, pouring in, pouring in.
O'Neill had built the walls of his trap with firing steps, allowing musketeers to fire, then duck down and reload while another man stepped up to discharge his shot. Other musketeers fired down from the windows of surrounding houses. Death came in many ways to Cromwell's soldiers who were caught in O'Neill's trap. Some were stabbed with pikes or slashed with scythes. Others were crushed by timber blocks hurled by an improvised catapult. Still others were mutilated by cannons firing chain shot. This is what's known as chain shot. It's essentially two cannonballs joined by a length of chain. When this was fired, it would spin through the air and cut a bloody path through an enemy formation. Even if the chain broke, which it often did under the impact of firing, it simply turned the cannon into the ultimate shotgun. It may be that war is hell is the ultimate cliche, but the fighting in the breach at Clonmel sure came close. When the town gates didn't open quickly, Cromwell sensed that something was going wrong with the assault. He rode over to the breach to see for himself and was furious to see his men retreating from the wall. Cromwell urged his infantry to fight on, but for the first time his charisma had no effect on his troops. So he ordered his cavalry to dismount and sent them into the breach.
Crossroads, charge! Yeah!
He really just has one tactic, which is to blast the walls and charge in. Now that works successfully at Drogheda and to some degree at Wexford as well. At Clonmel it goes disastrously wrong, and Cromwell really doesn't have a plan B.
Fighting continued inside the walls for 3 hours before Cromwell was forced to admit defeat and call off his assault.
Fall back!
Somewhere between 1,000 and 2,500 parliamentary soldiers died in that assault, around a tenth of Cromwell's army. Many of his senior officers lay dead.
The resistance that was put up by Hugh O'Neill was very effective and cost Cromwell a great many men and really gave him a bloody nose. I mean, even great generals have bad days at the office. Cromwell was no exception. He didn't bat 1,000, and nobody does.
Surprisingly, the following day, the mayor of Clonmel surrendered the town to Cromwell. But when Cromwell marched through the gates, he discovered that Duff O'Neill had outwitted him again. Low on ammunition and supplies, the cunning Irish commander had moved his force out of town under cover of darkness. In the end, Cromwell had succeeded in taking the town, but the siege of Clonmel remains a blight on his record. After Clonmel, Cromwell finally gave in to the mounting pressure to return to England. He departed Ireland on 26 May 1650 to prepare for war against a royalist invasion force in Scotland.